I think it represents a tremendous segue from this morning when we started out with a very fundamental of geography and human geography and population, and now we move towards sensors and technology, and we really are, I think, moving fast towards the future. And I also want to reiterate my comments that I made in accepting the award earlier about how all my work really is based on having good people work for me, and you just saw Josh show what he did with MapGive, because that was really his baby, and it's great when you have people like Josh who leave your office. Who work for you. So anyway, this is the last panel of the day, and it's going to be a little bit different than our previous efforts. It's called, the title of the panel is now called, Creating an Investment Roadmap, because it's changed a few times. Originally, it started out, for those of you who were trolling the website, as what was it, Investment Law and Policy. And I think we changed it to the Creating an Investment Roadmap, because it's really all bundled up into how do we invest for the future, but we're not just talking about a financial investment, we're talking about human capital, we're talking about merging data and technology and people, like we just heard in the last session. And I think we have Matt and Barbara, who are here not to talk about the work they do and the work they have done, which has been really remarkable, but to really use their experience to think about galvanizing this group and generating some ideas that we can probably try to get the audience involved in, to think about this roadmap for the future. So we have Barbara, who's prior to her current position was the director of the WMO space program. She was the associate director of USGS geography, right? And she has a really deep background in a lot of the issues we're talking about today. Matt comes from a legal background. He was in the communications business, satellite world. And so I think we've asked them to draw upon their experiences, draw upon the comments they've heard today, make some comments, and then really throw it open to the audience and do some mini crowdsourcing of our own to try to see if we can work together to build this investment roadmap for the future. So thanks very much. Matt, I believe you're going to kick it off.
Yep.
Right?
First off, I want to thank Chris for asking me here. It's fun to be here. I think this is a great symposium, and I've actually never been in this beautiful library. I have to say in the beginning, I am not a geographer. I didn't go to Columbia, although when I was a musician in New York City, we always used to come out and try new material at Columbia, because the two other guys in the band were single and they wanted to date women who were intelligent and hip. And I realized just this afternoon they were doing geospatial analysis, when you think about it. We were stoned out hippies, but there was a method to the madness. Barb and I are the only thing between you and a drink, so we're going to go fast. And then we're going to plant some questions. We have questions for friends that we've seen today, but we'll also take your questions. I was a venture capitalist for years. As I look at the market now, it seems like a tale of two markets. It's the best of times. It's the worst of times. The investment market is very strong right now. Funds are awash in cash. The most outrageous story I heard was many of us are friends with a guy named Gilman Louie, and Gilman and his fund, Allsup Louie, put $9 million into Twitch TV over 3 years. When Amazon bought Twitch TV for $1.1 billion, they got $167 million back. I know Anthony doesn't like numbers. Who is it? Where's Anthony? Was over there somewhere. He doesn't like math. But for you mappers, that's a 1,800% return in 3 years, which is a lot better than your IRA, I guarantee you. There's a backside for that, which is valuations scare a lot of people, and I'll come back to that in just a second. The valuation scare fund managers, just 2 nights ago, a fund manager was at my house in Washington. He said, Matt, I've raised $850 million, and I don't have a single idea that I can afford to invest in, because he didn't like the valuations and didn't see how he was going to make a return. The second bit of good news, though, is that technology has enabled a lot of new businesses. Just look at the low cost of telecom communication. It's easy to transport data long distances. When Mark Brender and I were first working on ground stations with the space imaging group, you all had to have ground stations everywhere. With cheap telecoms, you can ship even big data back and forth. Pixia is a big player in that game. Other cost reductions, small sats. I've gone out and looked at what Planet is doing. Robbie's company is doing something incredibly disruptive. Skybox was cheap, but Robbie's company is even more disruptive. I'd encourage everybody to go look at it. Listen to what Josh Campbell just said. We have a gajillion sensors out there, so sources of info are getting more plentiful. As they do, not only do the small sats cost less, but then they engender their own price reduction because data becomes cheaper and we can use it for more, and then we can do more analysis, which is really what we all ought to do. The third very positive trend, I think, is that the unwashed masses are now very aware of how valuable location information is. There are really two eras in our business, I'd say. Again, I'm not a geographer, but I think Google Earth and Google Maps were a watershed. I would say that even if my friend Brian wasn't here. But just as consumers got used to looking for stores on their phones rather than the yellow pages, businesses have gotten used to using geospatial information for lots of decision making, and it's becoming mainstream. I just heard in a private conversation that ABB, which is I think of as a construction company, is making hundreds of millions of dollars on its geospatial line. Not its construction, but geospatial, which really floored me. I think we can now paraphrase what Professor Crook said this morning about medicine. As she said, we know there's a cost to preventing disease, but we know there's a cost to not preventing disease. And one of the most effective sales pitches that we made at GeoEye was the cost of gathering geospatial information is declining, and the cost of analyzing it is declining, and we can now weigh the cost of not gathering and analyzing the information against the cost of gathering it. I think more and more businesses are getting that. Okay, that's the good news side of the story. The bad news is that a lot of our business has been very government-centric, and government doesn't really have a lot of money right now. It's still a source of good revenue for some companies, big ones like Lockheed and Raytheon, smaller ones like Pixia and Human Geo, who are in the room. But even if you're a big company like Lockheed, there was a headline a month ago that said, in aerospace, defense is an offense. Lockheed had good news today, but profits were down. The article's conclusion was the U.S. government was putting increased pressure on costs, and working for and depending on the U.S. government was a sign of weakness. I think that that's true for public companies. It's even more challenging for private companies. Again, I came from venture capital, and then I became an entrepreneur. We ended up going public, but I still am very familiar with the private side of the ledger. It's really a bit of a buzzkill right now for companies who are too government-centric. The investors are worried about sequestration. They're also worried about termination for cause. I'm kind of the poster boy for termination for cause. We had great timing. I was one of the big advocates for using commercial satellite imagery for mapping, and the government saw, I think, the true logic of that. Our timing was good. GeoEye increased its value from $30 million to $1.3 billion, but then as sequestration came in, we looked at it and said, my God, this is scary. We had done a good job of warning our investors that termination for cause wasn't just something academic. They still didn't believe it, though. When sequestration hit, we were cut because we had the biggest contract. We had won a contract for $3.8 billion, biggest imagery contract ever led. So because we were biggest, we kind of stuck out like a sore thumb and got cut. Even though we had warned our investors, they were shocked that termination for cause really, for convenience, really could occur. And they said, oh my God, the government welched on a deal. I remember talking to one of the big money managers here in New York and saying, you know, you got to be ready because this may get cut. And he said, you have a contract with the U.S. government. They can't do that. So I think Wall Street was really surprised. No, we all laugh. He's a really, God knows, this guy's a billionaire many times over. But investors are now much more cautious because they've seen sequestration, they've seen a big termination for convenience. I was pleased to see the New York Times writer here. I just want to note for his sake, I am not saying that the government welched on the deal. I'm saying what investors are saying. The other thing I would note is that Robert Cardillo has left. I am not Robert's lackey. I was Tish Long's lackey. I choose carefully who I am the lackey for. And the third thing I'll say is that our investors were very happy because we had the write-up, we saw the risk, and we got out of government contracting. But government contracting and too much government work can be a threat. I heard a private company talking about it just yesterday as they were talking about raising a new round of investment. There is some U.S. government investment still. In-Q-Tel is still a bright light. That's where Boundless Geo got its first money. Brian Hibbelin is in the audience. He's doing good work, although I can't tell you about it or I'd have to kill you. But the third element that's the negative side of the ledger is valuations. Okay, you've got Twitch TV is very exciting. WhatsApp is very exciting. But investors are really put off. The guys who made the money on Tumblr and Twitch and WhatsApp are all delighted, and they're all friends of mine, so I think they're brilliant. But I would say that a lot of investors are put off by that. Think back to the guy I told you about who just raised $850 million and can't think of something to invest in because he thinks it's all too expensive. So I'd say it's a good time for the long term. Investors will, no question, make a lot of money in this field. And I think the small companies who are agile can make money. They can get money from PE guys. They can get money from venture capitalists. They can also get money from customers. And that's where a lot of companies like Pixio and Human Geo have gotten going. They have bootstrapped this. With that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Barb, and then we'll come back and pepper you with some questions.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Let's see, I guess what I might try to do is just hit maybe three themes that I've heard today. And then, like Matt said, we do have a couple questions and would maybe want to tease out a couple things that came out of the earlier discussions today. For me, right off the bat, number one is just the power of place. I think there wasn't a speaker today that got up and didn't talk about some visceral connection with the earth and the importance of the power of place. And so regardless of technology or whatever, there is a connection with humans. Now, I think it's in jeopardy, and that comes up with maybe some of the questions that Karen asked and a little bit later on, but we can come back to that. My personal story was 1974, eastern Colorado. We were going out and doing measurement of groundwater of wells to look at drawdown in the Ogallala Aquifer using the old standard USGS topographic maps. And of course, you see on the map that you need to take a right at the orchard. Sure enough, you look at the map and there's an orchard on the map. And so now, is that connection still there with all of our digital technology? Absolutely. But there really was kind of a heartwarming feeling that you could look at a map that was probably produced in 1950 or 60 to show an orchard, and then there it is. So it's this connection with looking at something, some representation of the earth, and then having it match what you're actually seeing. So the power of place. I don't know how many times today we heard about just ecosystems. You look at the people in the room, whether it's governments, whether it's the private sector, whether it's civil society. Let's go back to 1851 when AGS was first created. I mean, there really was a tenor at the time, certainly in the United States and in Europe, about just this westward expansion. And it wasn't just government investment. There was substantial private sector investment that was taking place, whether it was the laying of the first transatlantic cable, whether it was the railroads. I mean, it really was an ecosystem, 100, 200 years ago. Which then brings me, I guess, to the third thing I heard, which is that our institutional structures are failing us. The ice is still melting, the sea level is still rising, and yet we haven't quite been able to figure out how these institutions can interact with each other. And so then, again, I think maybe that would be a question a little bit later on for Alex in the first panel with, I guess it was it Deborah also at the same time, with this just rise of what I would call maybe even a return to the city-state. So a lot of the conversation was talking about nation states, but when you think about the future, I'm not sure those governance structures are still valid. And then I guess maybe the last thing is just coming back to this human interaction again. You know, on the third or fourth panel today, and it was, Michael, your conversations about, you know, science fiction and it kind of giving us a window into the future. And I couldn't help but think of a book that I read by Neil Stevenson called Snow Crash, where we were in fact wired in, and so it was in fact virtual reality and our own reality together. And although I really do think I'm an eternal optimist, I guess what I would have to do is go back to Karen's question about, well, how are we going to get people to reconnect with nature or the earth? And I think that's an intervention that was made by a person after your question today. When you walk down the street and you see just people wired, I mean, I think we've lost that battle. I think it's over. For as much of an optimist as I am, I think there is no going back. And if we just look at the way that people are now interacting with machines and handheld devices, you know, I'm kind of sorry to say it, but I think our evolution is towards the robotic end of the spectrum, not kind of human end of the spectrum on where we are right now. I guess I will stop. I guess I'll stop there.
Okay.
On not such a happy note, I guess.
So now we're going to take questions, or you can ask questions of any prior speaker. And I'm going to lead off with a question. I was looking for Jeff Harris, but I think he's fled the room. I warned him. Oh, there he is. There he is. Jeff is probably somewhat prejudiced. He was on the Skybox board. But he also ran the NRO, which has huge satellites. So, Jeff, we've heard from Planet Labs. We've heard Brian talk about Skybox. Do you think that small sats will really have a big impact on the mapping community?
Interesting question. It's one that you can put in perspective.
You can look at them.
But I'm answering your question.
Okay.
It's one that you want to put in perspective for what problem you're trying to solve. In the beginning, as we referred to the Cold War earlier today, we were answering these grand unanswerable problems. We had missile gaps, we had bomber gaps, we had, as a third grader, huddling under my desk, working these national problems. Technologies coming along where we were launching rockets in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and getting it all to work as a system was quite a challenge. As you see the technologies coming together and enabling everything else, it soon became an argument, was the hard part building and launching the rockets, or the hard part doing something with the data? So beginning in 1960 for the NRO systems, in 1972 for the civil Landsat system, we started creating these huge data sets that allowed us to get insights about the planet. So as I was sitting in the government in the early 90s, we wrote the policy that would enable the declassification of the previous NRO satellites, and we also wrote the policy to allow the commercialization of high resolution. And the whole idea was to advance the technology and advance the greater good that we're talking about. And it was very much consistent with what Director Cardillo talked to us about today, that all ships will rise on that. So the excitement is, we invented a bunch of really geeky special stuff. We've now increasingly put it into a context where it's interoperable. Lots of people have been rewarded for the business that they have gone into to make a difference. The government's still in business, the companies are still in business. They work together, Matt, as you said, in a government industry. But even more, we can break the shackles of where the technology was developed and are now allowed to move out and accelerate for all the missionaries we talked about today.
You know, you talk, no good deed goes unpunished. You touched on one thing that reminded me of Dennis Fitzgerald, who was at NRO and said we ought to declassify faster. His holy grail was automated affordable change detection. And at that time, I was running a growing satellite company, so free satellite data available in the world didn't tickle me. But he said, maybe we should declassify our stuff faster. If we gave this out faster, maybe people could develop the holy grail. Just as Josh Campbell was talking about, you get more points of data, it helps you build a better system faster. Should we be declassifying faster?
It was interesting growing up. I remember the premier of the Soviet Union slamming his shoe on the podium just down the street. And as we were declassifying the Cronus satellite, I was traveling around the country on a speech circuit with Sergei Khrushchev, his son, and who was teaching at Brown University at the time. And I said to him one night at dinner, so what's it like to grow up with your father, the premier of the Soviet Union? And I asked him specifically about Eisenhower's proposal for open skies. And Sergei said, I remember my father distinctly saying, we can't allow the West to see how weak we are. And so as you move to a more transparent world in non-transparent societies, you know, there is a price to be paid on one side or the other of that equation. And so some of these technologies we have to wait to the right time. And so the insights that we give our policymakers are awfully important. When I was in the intelligence community, we regularly had clear knowledge of the intent in international commerce to put a competitor out of business. And I remember, and we could get these documents, and you'd be tempted to want to share it with the company that was under attack. And that's not how we play. We allow the capital market to take care of that. But advising the Department of Commerce when somebody was making a business decision and that person had been paid off and was doing something illegal in the international regime. You know, I remember one decision that we reversed that instantaneously created 100,000 jobs in America. I mean, one single decision on a tilted scale. And so some of those secrets that we discover keep us safe at night, but they also keep us employed.
Okay. Barb, can I ask one more?
Yeah, go right ahead.
So, Lee, you're fair game. You're standing here. I'm going to fire one at you. So here's the question for Lee. A couple of us, like Chris Tucker and I, were on the National Geospatial Advisory Council, and I was shocked to discover. Anybody in the room know how many agencies keep a database of names and addresses in the U.S. government? Any guesses? 42. I said, geez, couldn't we save a little money by combining some of this? And they said, oh, then you've got a risk of error. And besides, they could spy on you. And I said, wait, error with 42? You got error with 2. You got error with 1. You got, you know, but, so I'm going to nominate Lee as and you can object to this, but shouldn't we have we have Cardillo as as he said, the geographer for the Defense Department. Shouldn't we have a civilian geography czar? And couldn't you save money by consolidating all this stuff? And if because you're in state you have to look outside, then maybe Tim Traynor does it. But shouldn't one person do it instead of wasting all this money?
Obviously, I think it would be an efficiency if one person would do that. And obviously, I don't want that person to be me. But I think if I can harken back to what I said in my comments very early on in the day, is I think what we need to have is a distinction between strategic thinking from geographers and data management and information management, which also I think geographers have played a role in. So my preference would, if that one position were to be consolidated, that would be more in the name of a geographic information management officer of some sort, who's responsible for data standards and consistency and openness and all the things that are being worked at the FGDC and other areas. But it still leaves us shy of having the capacity and the capability of being able to utilize that data, being able to analyze it, being able to apply it. And so I would like to see still a distinction between those types of roles and responsibilities.